Hi everybody, this is Rich again, and this is part 2 of the introductory video in the Psychology of Human Sexuality, which I have entitled simply The Nature and Nurture of Human Sexuality. And this is, again, giving you a concrete upon which to place the scaffold of the rest of the course. And so we are touching on the issues that we will talk about in much greater depth later. And today we're starting off, if you're following the PowerPoint, which is what I recommend, with psychological and social origins of sexual problems. And this is a general approach. These are basic ideas. Many of the origins of problems with sexual functioning later in life come from the structure of communications with families, among other origins. So one is that a family that is very restrictive and uncommunicative, ones that do not, in fact, provide any sex education, may inadvertently, and frequently do, convey to children that sex is somehow a taboo subject, is somehow bad, and that is one origin. Another is a family in which there are enmeshments, or at the other end of the spectrum, disengagement. So families in which they are very much not having good boundaries. Yes, they are in each other's business and face, and there's lots of very much a lack of privacy and so forth and so on. That can engender some issues in sexuality. And the other is a disengaged family, and disengaged family is very separate and very much not in each other's business. They don't sit down to a dinner table together and talk about how everybody's doing and those kinds of things. Okay, another possible origin of problems in sexual functioning later could be, and very well is in many cases, traumatic sexual experiences, unwanted sexual touch. Now, the degree of negative outcome has to do with a number of factors. We'll talk about those later. But a few I'll mention. One is the age of the child, the perpetrator, what happened, the resilience of the child psychologically, the ameliorative efforts afterwards. In other words, did they get therapy? Those kinds of things, among other factors. Another origin of sexual dysfunction would be existing in a highly dysfunctional relationship as an adult. If you're in a relationship in which things are not going well, then that actually can show up, and frequently does, as you might expect, in the bedroom. And then some psychological disorders, namely depression and anxiety, as well as others, can and we expect particularly depressive disorders to affect sexual dysfunction. Absolutely, we expect that. We're not surprised by it. Now, all relationships have, at all levels, components connected to sexuality, believe it or not. There are expected behaviors that we have within our social structure and within our family, and we have to learn what those are. The rules to engagement, and rules as far as who you touch and who you don't, who you hug, who you don't, the way you shake hands, what you say, what you don't say. So consider that two heterosexual men who are becoming friends, do they hold hands or put their arms around each other in the same way that females do? No, and you would wonder what that's about, and I'll let you think about that. We'll talk about that later. So there are often confusing or conflicted feelings, being sexually attracted to people that you didn't expect to be attracted to, or who are in a role with you where that is not a possibility, or any number of things can arise that create confusing and conflicting feelings. And then the presence of sexual tension in most interactions between two people. Much of it is unconscious, but some of it sort of pushes its way into the consciousness of the person who is having these sort of sexual tensions, and they may actually not understand it. Okay, let's talk about touch. We're covering a lot of subjects here. We're mammals. We once were covered with hair. We had a lot more hair, even just as Homo sapiens, not only as those species that came before us, but we had mostly hair. In fact, the piloerections, the goosebumps you get, were likely sites of hair. And so what do mammals do? Well, they rub up against each other for purposes of scent and establishing hierarchies within a pack or troop. It is a comforting gesture. Physical touch, right from birth, for humans and other animals, of course, is essential for our well-being. Essential. Babies don't get appropriate and in quantity affectionate touch. They don't do well. In fact, they can fail to thrive, it's called, and even die in some cases. So end up with disorders like reactive attachment disorder, for example, and poor outcomes in terms of their attachment style. Okay, so we have affectionate touch, and we have sexual touching. Sexual touch may be affectionate, or it may not be. Sexual touch may begin with affectionate touch. So affectionate touch may lead to sex, but it usually doesn't. The point here is that appropriate touch is very healing and very comforting. Yes. And that's why we yearn for it. That is to say, most people do. But not everybody. Okay. Well, who talks to us about sex? Most people in most places of the world, but this is not true everywhere. For example, in Scandinavian countries, there is a greater emphasis on comprehensive sex education than there would be in a place like the United States, where there are islands of comprehensive sex education, but where it's provided in the United States, sex education is predominantly abstinent only. So they tell you that, just don't do it. Which doesn't work, by the way. The research is very clear on this issue. Comprehensive sex education produces a number of nice outcomes, which include the option, of course, to say no to sex. It emphasizes the context of relationships in which sexuality may occur. It talks about physiology and biology, but it also talks about relationships. It covers a wide range of subjects, and a good program would start young at age-appropriate language and age-appropriate depth of knowledge. The outcomes include waiting to have sex longer, more likely to use birth control and prophylactics, and lower rates of unwanted pregnancy, therefore, and lower rates of sexually transmitted infections. Mm-hmm. Did you have a sex talk by your parents? If you did, you're in the minority, a distinct minority. If you did, was it fun or rewarding? Well, it was probably rewarding if you took away from it some knowledge you didn't have. But these talks are often sudden and one-shot deals in parents that give them, and they're not usually preceded by other conversations of deep information where people have comfort over the long span and having conversations about important things like sex. So most of the time, people are very anxious and embarrassed, including the parents who provide the talk. They're worried that you're going to ask what they do sexually, or did you do that, Mommy, or something like that. So there may be this double-sided anxiety about the talk. We have some information about who does get spoken to, boys or girls, and at what rate in the United States for each issue. How to say no to sex? Well, you'd imagine that's much more likely to be taught to females. Of course it is. 63% of females are talked to about saying no, and only about 42% of males. Methods of birth control, same thing. Girls, 51%, boys, only 31% are talked to about birth control. Where to get birth control? Females, 38%, boys, 20%. See, it really should be 100% on both sides, shouldn't it? Of course, but it isn't. STDs, or STIs, as we prefer to say it now, it's a 50 to 55% boys and girls. That's promising, but it's not 100%. It's not even in the 90s, which is, I would wish it were at least there. And then how to use a condom? Well, boys, 38%, and girls, 20%. Well, you want that one to be really high. Okay, you understand, as we change to another subject concerning the media and marketing, that we are bombarded by sexual imagery daily and messages connected to those images. You also will understand immediately that couples don't prepare for sex by talking about safe sex practices before they have sex, on average. And you don't see it in the media either. You don't see it in marketing. You ever hear on a TV show or a movie where someone says, we need to talk about birth control and protection, or we need to both get tested for sexually transmitted infections before we have sex, or is what we're doing okay with you? See, if you really care about people, if you really love somebody, or you're working towards loving someone and you're sexual with them, if you respect them and you care about them and you respect and care about you, you would have those conversations. You would both go get tested, because many STIs can remain in the body without any symptoms and continue to infect partners. And the person who has them would say, I don't have any infections, just on the basis of they don't feel like they have any infections. They don't feel any symptoms. Wrong conclusion. Okay. And also in the media, you will know that the media has a goal, and that's to sell you products. And the way they sell you products is to make you afraid of how you are and pair their products with sex. Sex sells. So movies and magazines and TVs and books have both explicit and implied messages regarding sex. Sex is used to sell alcohol. It's used to sell cosmetics and fragrances. It's used to sell alcohol. It's used to sell almost anything. Now, for females, fashion trends and cosmetics and fragrances and so on are particularly targeted. And the way that they are targeted to females, unfortunately, is often about making you afraid of your unacceptability. So the product that they're going to sell you is the solution. They're providing you the solution to the fear that they will stoke that you are somehow unacceptable. You see? So this is, in my view, in my humble opinion, part of why we see the statistics, concerning women around puberty, girls around puberty, who see a decline on average in self-esteem as they get towards the college years, which can continue, by the way, is that the culture reinforces low self-esteem, particularly for females. To some degree for males, but not in the same way. And there's all sorts of connections to evolution and biology, and this is not yet the time for that. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So if you look at magazines, you'll see ridiculous emphases on acceptability and the lack thereof, and the visual imagery, the articles, the tests, like you see the bogus little surveys they give you in Cosmopolitan. All of this is rigged to make you feel as if you are not as good as other people, and it's often implied, but sometimes it's explied. Males can be seen holding bottles of cologne, partially dressed and sweaty and looking as if they've just had sex. And the look on they're holding the cologne, of course, and the look on their faces is one of predation. They look as if they've had a meal or something. Take a look sometime at these ads from those perspectives. Okay, so the manipulation is a little like this. This is the way I have seen this progression. They present you with an idea that you aren't okay the way they are. You are either how you're dressed or how you look or your skin or your hair or whatever it may be. And you aren't acceptable unless you're like these people that they're going to show you that use the product. And they have special things. They're having a great time. They have great boyfriends or girlfriends. They're just, everything's good for them. And they look wonderful according to cultural standards. They're in the 1%, by the way, which is usually genetic in some ways, not through using this product, of course, whatever it is. And then they tell you, well, you can't be happy unless you have what they have and do what they do and use the products we'd like to sell you. And if you spend money on these products, you will be like them and you will be happy. Therefore, so you will be acceptable and loved. Finally, your dream has been met. Okay. So what's normal and abnormal and healthy? Well, normal does not mean healthy. And abnormal doesn't mean unhealthy. Normal means statistically prevalent. Generally, that it's somewhere over half of the population does this or has this or is characterized by this. Normal in sexual behavior is a wide range. Okay? Later, we're going to talk about typical sexual behaviors, which we will call normal. Normal seems to, normal is so good, No, just normal statistically. We'll talk about those. Then we're going to talk about abnormal, and what that means is less common. Okay? We'll have two different sections on that later. And then I want to present to you a potential definition for healthy sexual behavior. Okay? And this is a definition that is compiled from a number of others, and I think it's useful. So you can read this. It's on slide 39, and just take a look at it. It says this, that healthy sexual behavior means that the activity or belief, I guess, brings connection between the two people engaged in that, conveys respect, is safe emotionally and physically, promotes growth, and it implies that the participants are willing adults. How's that? Okay. Now, switching gears again, one of the things you may know is that sex in the United States and virtually everywhere else is androcentric. It is male-oriented. It is male-dominated. Here are some facts that would back that up. Males are the ones that usually buy sex. They pay for sex. Yes, there are gigolos, but there's a tiny percentage of all sex for sale individuals. Sexual response for men versus women is different. The explanation for male domination has to do with sexual dimorphism, which tells us that males are much bigger and stronger, more muscular and faster than, and more aggressive really, than females, and that their sexual response is like a light switch. Poof, the light switch goes on. Anything can stimulate sexual interest in a male. Poof, and then being sexual and the light goes off, switch goes off, boom. Females are more like an iron that you plug into the wall. You plug it in, turn it on, and it takes a while to warm up, and it heats up, it gets very hot, and they can do all the ironing that they want, and then they turn the switch off, and then it's still warm for a long period of time, and then it eventually cools down. That's the difference between male and female sexual response in a sort of analogy. Another fact that would tell you about androcentricity of sexuality is that women take men's names when they marry. Still, a majority of the time. That's changing a little, but for the majority of the time, that's still true. Women are the ones that use makeup and worry about their weight and dress in alluring ways and buy the latest fashions and spend an enormous amount of money on shoes and things like that. That these are adornments, jewelry, adornments, and attention grabbing, shiny objects. Here, ooh. And so males don't do that on average. Yes, they may pay attention to clothing and so on, but it's not. It's more for status in males than it is for females, which is more about garnering attention. Is this a problem or not? What would happen if women suddenly stopped wearing makeup, stopped wearing skimpy outfits, stopped wearing perfume, jewelry? What would happen if women stopped shaving their armpits and their legs? What would happen? If everyone stopped, nothing would happen. There'd be a short adjustment period, and then in heterosexual relationships, men would start chasing women again. Because in the vast history of human beings, nobody shaved. Nobody did any of that stuff, and copulation still occurred, right? There was still attraction between males and females. In fact, there's a good story about why women shave in the first place. In much of the world, women don't shave to this day. But in the United States in particular, there's a good story about that, which I'll tell you later. Well, why do people have sex? Well, any reason you can think of, many of which, probably most of which, are healthy. Recreation, procreation, curiosity, developing sexual skills, expressing love, expressing liking, boredom, just wanting to feel pleasure, wanting to feel desire. Those are all healthy reasons. Less healthy reasons, compulsivity, being compulsive in your drive to, you must have sex. Expressing hostility. Some people are hostile in their sexual behaviors. Those are not so great. What would a survey say, and we have what the survey says about that, why people don't want to have sex at a particular time within the context of a sexual relationship? Too tired to need sleep? A little over half. Not feeling well or health problems? About a half. Not in the mood? About 40%. Got to take care of the children or pets? 30%. Have to work? 30%. Want to keep watching TV or a movie? About 20%. I consider the last one a bit of a lame excuse. But, that's more than 100% because people use more than one of these excuses in the context of a relationship, perhaps. And by excuse, that has a pejorative connotation, doesn't it? And it shouldn't, because people, if they don't want to have sex, really ought ordinarily to just decline, and say, yeah, I'm really not interested right now. Really don't want to right now. And that should be enough. On the other hand, males and females can remain able to be seduced by a partner. Yes? And when we talk about sexual communication in the context of a relationship, we're going to cover that topic. Again, this is just introductory material. Now, so what's a little bit more about unhealthy sex? What would be some things that are essential about understanding what's unhealthy? Well, emotionally or physically unsafe or damaging sexual behavior. So having sex with a partner you don't know, a random person, and not using any protection. Even if you did, it would be risky, because condoms don't prevent all sexually transmitted infections. They just don't. Oral sex does not prevent you from getting virtually all sexually transmitted infections. And ironically, the one that they're probably least likely to get from oral sex is HIV. I said compulsive sex, yes. Sex that chronically substitutes for real relationships. So some people really love the in-love part, the super sexual section of a relationship that's just building. just the early stages of it. And then as the sex gets a little bit less frequent, they may see that as a sign the relationship's falling apart, or it may not be enough for them, and they'll jump to another relationship. That can happen. So those are some ideas about unhealthy sex. What are some options that people choose for sexual activity on average? Well, celibacy. Some people choose that for a lot of reasons. Religious reasons. They fear sex. Some people definitely fear sex. Some people really are afraid of sexually transmitted infections. Some people want to simply be available just to the person who's a life partner. So celibacy is a choice. Partial or full. Autoeroticism, that has nothing to do with cars. But masturbation, that's an activity people choose. Safe fantasy enactment, in other words, not running around naked in the neighborhood, but rather maybe dressing up or something, a safe fantasy enactment. Kissing and erotic touching, mutual genital stimulation, oral genital stimulation, vaginal intercourse, anal intercourse. We'll talk about all of these things as we move forward. Now, the West, jumping to another subject, we are now on, by the way, slide 47, moving on. The West expects people, unfortunately, to all be heterosexual and only have vaginal intercourse. Okay, everybody has to have an orgasm. Only two people in a relationship, and it has to be romantic, and there has to be a deep, moving experience of heart to heart, and procreation. That's what has traditionally been the acceptable list of sexual behaviors, and that's just not what people do. That people are not all heterosexual, you may know. People don't always just have vaginal intercourse or always have an orgasm, and sometimes people don't have relationships with just one other person, or even sex with just one other person. And it isn't always a romantic adventure to have sex with someone. And for the most part, human beings only have recreational sex, not procreative sex. So the way the world is not the way the expectations of cultures throughout the world have had as expectations, in particular Western expectations. Now, some advantages of sex that are research-based, just by general topic. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the details. But the first thing is that sex relieves stress, lowers your blood pressure. It has been seen to lower diastolic blood pressure over a longer period of time when people are living together. Married or unmarried, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Sex does boost immunity. We see higher levels of certain antibodies in people that have sex 1 or 2 times a week. It burns calories. 30 minutes of the average kind of sex, that is to say, if you're looking at intercourse, it burns about 85 calories per minute. So you'd have to have sex for about 4 hours to equal a Milky Way. Okay. Sex improves cardiovascular health. Having sex twice or more a week reduces the risk of fatal heart attacks by half for men in one study. A lot of research is still on men, unfortunately. Sex does improve intimacy, releases the hormone oxytocin, which helps the bodies relax or have closeness and cuddling and pair bonding and a feeling of generosity and attachment, those kinds of things. Sex reduces pain, endorphins increase, and pain declines. Sex reduces pain in terms of reducing anxiety, which then is connected to pain, and it increases the pain threshold during sexual activity. Reduces prostate cancer risk in men, and one study's had us seeing like, oh my, how could this be? But it's true. It's been repeated. Men who have had 5 or more ejaculations weekly in their 20s, however that is produced, reduce their risk of getting prostate cancer later by 1/3. 21 ejaculations or more a month are linked to lower prostate cancer risk in older men. So we recommend that men masturbate if they're not in a sexual relationship, or if they are still. Make sure that you have 21 ejaculations, including masturbation if you can. That helps. Mm-hmm. Sex strengthens pelvic floor muscles for both males and females. Sex helps you sleep better. which means it's connected to maintaining healthy weight and blood pressure more effectively. Sleep is connected to an awful lot of things. If you can get good sleep, which would include, in the context of a relation, having more sex, that would be a really good thing. We know that people who don't get enough sleep gain a lot of weight, or potentially gain a lot of weight. Sex boosts self-esteem. It's a demonstration that you're desired, that you're wanted by a partner. It improves intimacy. Making love means creating love, if you want to see it that way. Sex improves communication. Touch is an underserved need. We definitely have a touch need, a skin hunger, some have called it. It reduces hostility, anger, and anxiety to be cuddly and warm and sexual and your partner. Builds trust in the context of a relationship. Absolutely. Now, I have an exercise in here that I did in class, which is just write a quick paragraph of what you think a perfect romantic evening would be that includes sexual behaviors. What are the elements of that? And that's going to give you an idea. Give you time to do that if you're doing it now. Just pause the video. Okay, so you're back, and it'll give you the idea that it's less about a particular physical activity as it is where and how. And often people will describe a relaxing getaway, or a great meal, or going for a walk on the beach, or staying at a nice bed and breakfast, or something like that. They have a good communication, they feel real close, and then sex evolves from that. You see, this is very interesting, isn't it? Because that can tell you all sorts of things about what sex really is and what it may not actually be that people will hear. Will think about when you say the word sex. There's a lot of things that are attached to that, yes? Okay. So we're going to use clinical language, not street language, even though couples, you might say as a therapist, will try to use clinical language but may not get it quite right, or they may use their own idiosyncratic language. So when you form a relationship, you develop the ways you describe body parts and sexual activity and so on, and that differs from clinical language. But it's important in medical settings and educational settings and in teaching children and other people that we use clinical language. Okay. And so, in conclusion, I just want to be sure that you know that we are going to talk about each of these issues in greater depth as we move through the course. If you're not taking this course, I hope you have an interest enough that allows you to follow through with this. And go ahead and like or dislike the videos, this one included, and you might wish to subscribe to see what pops up as a new video. Okay, see you next time. Bye.